Miss Helen was feeling a bit sweaty and instantly ordered him to detention for just making noise earlier in the school session. It all started one day. Mark was a shy, quiet 8-year-old boy who loved school, especially because of his favorite teacher, Miss Helen. She was tall, beautiful, and always seemed to have a kind word for everyone. But lately, something felt off. Her smiles didn't reach her eyes, and her patience seemed thinner. Mark didn't understand why, but he felt uneasy around her now. One afternoon, Mark was sitting in his usual seat, fidgeting with his pencil. He accidentally dropped it, and it rolled across the floor, making a soft clatter. Miss Helen, who was writing on the board, suddenly turned around, her face stern. "Mark," she snapped, her voice sharp. "Stop making noise and disrupting the class." Mark froze. "But Miss Helen, I just dropped my—" "No excuses," she interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "Detention. After school. No arguments." The other kids glanced at Mark, some giggling, others looking sympathetic. Mark's cheeks burned with embarrassment. He didn't understand why Miss Helen had been so harsh lately. She used to be so nice. The final bell rang, and the students rushed out of the classroom, eager to go home. Mark stayed behind, sitting at his desk while Miss Helen pretended to organize papers at her desk. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, and he felt a knot in his stomach. He didn't know why he was being punished for something so small. "Miss Helen," Mark said hesitantly, "I'm really sorry for earlier." "I didn't mean to," she cut him off, walking over to his desk. "Mark, you need to learn respect," she said, her voice softer now. She stood close, too close, and Mark felt uncomfortable. Her perfume was strong, and it made him feel dizzy. She reached out and adjusted his belt, her fingers lingering longer than necessary in the wrong place. Her touch felt cold and wrong, and Mark's stomach churned. Mark's heart raced. "Miss Helen, shish," she whispered, her hand brushing against his shirt. "You're a good boy, Mark. But you need to listen to me, okay?" Mark nodded, too scared to say anything. After she finished what she wanted, she stepped back and smiled. "You can go home now. But remember, detention continues tomorrow." Mark grabbed his bag and hurried out of the classroom, his mind racing. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew it felt wrong. His chest felt heavy, like a weight was pressing down on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling of her hands on him. The detentions continued, week after week. Each time, Miss Helen found a reason to keep Mark after school. She would touch his belt, his shoulders, or even his hair, always standing too close, always making him feel uneasy. One day, she made him sit at the front of the class, directly in front of her desk. She stood behind him, her presence looming over him like a shadow. She reached over him to adjust his collar, her fingers brushing against his neck. Mark's heart pounded, and he felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He wanted to squirm away, but he was too scared to move. "Miss Helen," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I don't like this." She shushed him gently, her hand moving to his hair, stroking it slowly. "It's okay, Mark," she said, her voice soothing but somehow wrong. "You're such a sweet boy. I just want to make sure you're okay." Mark didn't feel okay. He felt sick, his stomach churning with a mix of fear and confusion. He didn't know what to do. He wanted to run, to scream, but he was frozen in place, his small body trembling. Mark's emotions were a tangled mess. He felt ashamed, though he didn't know why. He kept replaying the moments in his head, wondering if he had done something to make Miss Helen act this way. Maybe he was a bad kid, like she said. Maybe he deserved this. At night, he would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He wanted to tell someone, but the words wouldn't come. He was afraid no one would believe him. Miss Helen was a teacher, after all. She was supposed to be someone he could trust. Who would believe an 8-year-old boy over her? He tried to tell his parents, but they were always too busy. His dad worked long hours, and his mom was constantly on the phone or running errands. One evening, Mark sat at the dinner table, pushing his food around his plate. "Mom," he said quietly, Something happened at school. Not now, Mark, his mom said, scrolling through her phone. I'm in the middle of something. But Mom, it's important, Mark insisted. Mark, I said not now, she replied, her tone sharper than she intended. Mark flinched and looked down at his plate. Later that night, he tried again with his dad. Dad, can I talk to you? Sorry, buddy, his dad said, grabbing his coat. I've got a late meeting. We'll talk tomorrow, okay? Mark nodded, but tomorrow never came. The days turned into weeks, and Mark felt more and more alone. One day, after another detention, Mark couldn't take it anymore. He sat on the steps outside the school, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know what to do. He felt trapped, scared, and helpless. Tom, his best friend, found him there. Mark, what's wrong? You've been crying for days. You have to tell me. Mark looked at Tom, his best friend, the only person who seemed to care. It's Miss Helen, he whispered, his voice trembling. She touches me. During detention. It feels wrong, but I don't know what to do. Tom's eyes widened. That's not okay, Mark. You have to tell someone. Your parents, the principal, someone. But they never listen, Mark said, his voice breaking. I've tried, but they're always too busy. Tom thought for a moment. Then I'll tell my mom. She'll know what to do. Tom's mom listened carefully when he told her about Mark. She immediately called Mark's parents and arranged a meeting with the principal, Mr. Thompson. Mark's parents were shocked and horrified when they finally heard what had been happening. In the principal's office, Miss Helen was called in. She walked in confidently, but her demeanor changed when she saw Mark and his parents. Miss Helen, Mr. Thompson began, there's been an allegation made against you. Mark has reported that you behaved inappropriately during detention. Miss Helen's face flushed. That's ridiculous, she said, her voice shaking. I would never. Mark is a good kid, Mark's father interrupted. He wouldn't make something like this up. Miss Helen looked down, her confidence crumbling. I didn't mean any harm, she stammered. I don't know what came over me. Mr. Thompson sighed. Miss Helen, this is unacceptable. You're being expelled from this school immediately. We'll also be reporting this to the authorities. Mark's mother stepped forward. We don't want to ruin her life, she said softly. She made a mistake, but she's young and single. Maybe she needs help, not punishment. Mr. Thompson nodded. We'll handle this internally, but she will never teach again. Miss Helen was expelled from the school, and Mark was transferred to a different class. The incident was kept quiet to protect Mark's privacy, but the school implemented stricter policies to ensure student safety. Mark's parents, realizing how they had failed him, made more time for him, listening to him and supporting him as he slowly began to heal from the experience. Tom remained by his side, a loyal friend who helped him through the tough times. As for Miss Helen, she disappeared from their lives, leaving behind a lesson about trust, boundaries, and the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong.